And hello and welcome. My name is Martin, and today what we're going to be doing is looking at how to use the cinematic that we just learned in the previous tutorial to create a opening and closing door. So what I've done here is I've used the same model that we're working in, right, which is the through what I'm calling a 3D side scroller. I've created an area that is like a wall that they can't pass by. I've created a pit. Maybe you can put some spikes down there, or something if you wanted to make them feel like if they fell down in there that was it. So they have to be able to get past this door. So what I've done is, of course, you have a mesh. Inside that mesh, we've created a subtractive mesh, and that has created the space that we need. Now, I haven't sized this yet because I don't know what size of the door that we're going to use this. So this is actually going to get resized once we know what door we are using. So there is a door pack, but you should just be able to type in door and go back to your content folder, and let's look for a static mesh. And depending on what packs you have downloaded, you will have a variety of different doors that are available to you. I have quite a few. Let's see if they're, you know what, let's use one of the ones that are up here. And the things that you will see is that you will have both a mesh and sometimes a door frame. So what I'm looking for is a combination of both of those two things. I want to see the door frame and the door. Sometimes you'll have door frames that'll work for multiple, or the frames that'll work for multiple doors. For example, like right now, we could just grab, let's say, let's grab this green one for fun. Okay, so I'm going to grab the door frame first, and I'm going to put it out onto the viewport. Okay, I'm going to then click it and add it. So the main thing that I want to do right now is, before I bring in the door, I want to see that the character can actually get through the door frame. If not, I'm going to have to resize the frame. Oops, where'd you go? Okay, so what we want to do now is want to make sure that the character can actually get through the door frame. So let's push play. And let's see if the door is indeed big enough for us to be able to get through. And it does feel that way. Okay, you know what? Let's put it in. Let's push play again, and let's push it into third player. And let's see if the character is indeed able to. Yep, they are indeed able to get through the door. Okay, so if you need to resize the door for whatever reason, maybe your character is a much larger character, you can always click on the door frame, and what I would do in this case would be use scale. And I wouldn't use too much, and I would make sure that it was completely locked before I did anything. So let's say 1.1, and we hit enter. You'll see that all the other axes stay the same. This will make sure that when you bring in the door that everything stays at 1.1.1, 1.1 3 times. So now if we push play, the door frame still looks average size. It doesn't look like it's gotten any bigger or any smaller. You know what? I don't know if that is because it's going through the floor. Okay, so it's definitely, so we'll go ahead and push play again. We'll hit T. That still feels good. Now you don't want to make the door frames too big, otherwise it's going to make the characters feel small. So, just be careful of making that too big. But let's say we had a capsule that was going to be interacting with something, and that may have been hitting the door because they're the same collision settings. So I've had that, and or really large characters. You might have there's a robot or something that's available from Paragon, which is like a really big character. But anyways, okay, so we have the door frame there. We've made sure that the door frame itself is the correct size. So now what I'm going to do is put the door frame where I want it as far as space, so then that way it makes sense for the wall. And then I'm going to go into the negative mesh. I should probably slow down. Anyways, negative mesh, and we're going to go ahead and size this down just a little bit. So let's go to the box, and let's bring that down. let's maybe 140 seems a bit small. Okay, I'm going to definitely slow down. Maybe not that slow. What I definitely don't want to see is any of the wall coming through the door frame. And if I need to, we can go unlit, so that way we can just double check and make sure. And I want to make sure that I'm not seeing any space in between the door frame. Okay, now the only thing we need to do is get the top of that going. Now remember that if you do that, you're gonna, so you actually have to size this correctly because it is cutting into the floor. So now let's move that back up. You could always hit end on the keyboard to make sure that it lines up. And see, this is what I mean. See how a little piece of that's coming through? So let's make this 185. Then we'll center that back up so it's not going back through the floor. And that seems, nope, still got a little piece of it there. So let's go 190. It's cutting through the floor. Let's go up. Hit the N key to lock. And yep, that's good. See how that's cutting right into the frame? We're not seeing any of the rock through it. Okay, perfect. So now you have adjusted a subtractive mesh to be the size of the door itself. Now, from there, obviously the mesh doesn't need to be super big, so we can thin it up a little bit and stick it back through. Okay, so now that we have that, we're ready for the door. So this one happened to be the green door. I'm going to grab the green door, put it out on the floor. Now, since I sized up the frame to the 1.1, I'm going to want to do the same thing to the door. Otherwise, it's not going to fit. 1.1. We'll hit enter. Okay, next job is to go ahead and line up Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to look at the door and I want to see what side the hinges are on, right? So if you look at the door frame, there is going to be an area that does have a hinge. And if I look at the door is also going to have that. So you're going to want to make sure that you don't flip the door around to where the hinges don't look right when the door opens. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is line up the door with the hinges. Okay, so a little bit off there. Remember that you don't necessarily need to use the triple tool down there at the bottom. You could come here and move these in yourself that way. Okay, so now that the hinges line up, we know that the door is in its intended position, and we are ready to move on to the next phase. Okay. So essentially what we need to do is twofold. We need to give the character the ability to be able to, or the player, the ability to be able to hit a key on their keyboard, which will then open the door. So in this case, oh, and the other thing you also need to do is create an animation for the door. So we need to combine a trigger on the keyboard with an animation inside the game, right? And in order to be able to accomplish this, we're going to use a trigger box, which is going to make sure that the key that we give the character to be able to open doors with, and I mean key on the keyboard, will only work when inside the trigger box. So this means they can't be halfway across the room, hit the key to open the door, and the door opens. That wouldn't make sense. It only makes sense if the character is close enough to be able to open the door by grabbing the door physically in their environment. So that's what we're going to do. Okay. And then from there, we want to make sure that the door can open and close, that it's not just a one-way action, that the action actually goes both ways. So the very first thing that we probably want to do is go into settings. And if you've been following along with my tutorials and you have done the inventory one, you don't have to do this because you already have a key that we're going to use for this. Otherwise, you do have to do this, and we're just going to look and see what we've already got there. So underneath settings, go to project settings. Inside project settings, we're looking for input. And right now we have the inventory, which is the tab key, and we have a key called the interact key, which is the E key. Now the E key is what we used in the inventory to pick items up with, right? So this is what your character is using as like its default interaction with the world, right? So if it's a thing that you need to pick up, it's E. If it's a door that you need to open, it's E. If there's a dresser drawer that you need to open, it's E. So this is our default go-to key for interacting with the world, and that's why it's called the interact key. So if you don't have it, what you're going to have to do is come up here to action mapping, create a new action map, call this interact, and then from here go to keyboard and select the E key. I'm going to go ahead and delete that since I don't need it, but it is again action mapping plus create give it a name called interact, and then give it the E key as the key that it's going to interact with, or that the player is going to select or push to make this work. Okay, so now that we have the E key available to us, what we need to do is put a trigger box somewhere near the door, or in the door. So we need to go to volumes, we're going to go to search, and we're going to type in trigger, and we're looking for trigger box. So we're going to put that out on the floor. And then we're just going to make this thing large enough that it covers the area for the door. Okay. Okay. Now the other thing that I'm also going to do with the trigger box is I'm going to actually make it longer on the back side than it is going to be on the front side. And the reason for this is because as the door swings back, we don't want to be in the way of the door as we're trying to open it. So if your character comes, like, let's say within this far away from the door as they're trying to run away from something, they can hit the E key. As they get close enough to the door will swing, and it'll swing open hopefully before they go through it. Now you can time that out by making the box longer, or making the animation shorter, or making the door not a flop door like this where it opens on a hinge, but a sliding door. So if you really need to get somebody out of somewhere in a hurry, and you want to make sure that their door doesn't like hit them as they're trying to get out, either make it to where the door opens this way as they're running out, definitely not this direction, or have a sliding door that it doesn't matter which way it's going to go, because it's going to go into the wall when it opens, so it won't be in your character's way as a mesh that they're going to be able to interact with. Alright, so now that we have the trigger box there, the next thing we need to do is actually start writing the code for this. So we've got the key that the character that the player is going to use. We now have the trigger box, and we now need to start writing the code for this. Now, before we move on, we should probably go ahead and name this trigger box. So if you have the trigger box selected, and you know the number of doors that you're going to have and all that, you can go ahead and go into the trigger box. Let's get rid of this. And inside instance name, you can actually, instead of it being called trigger box, maybe you can call it door1_tg for trigger box TB. Okay, so trigger box. Maybe we can spell out box just so that we know what it is. T-box, trig box. All right, and then this way, if we have multiple doors later, or we're going to assign doors different colors for different keys and things like that, it'll make more sense to have them named this way. Okay, so what we need to do now is go ahead and build the code. So let's go into the blueprints. Oh, sorry. Before we move on, we actually have to have the cinematic built, otherwise this isn't going to work. So let's go to a cinematic. Let's create add level sequence. Now we should already have one for the platform, so there's one here called platform sequences. In this case, because I don't know how many doors I'm going to have, so to keep my platforms and my doors separate, I'm going to go ahead and create a new box, and I'm going to call this one door sequences with no space. Okay, and then I may make at some point a master folder just called sequences and then drop all those into there. And you know what? Let's just go ahead and do that since we're going to have more. We're going to call these level underscore sequences so we know what they are. And then I'll grab door sequences and put it in there, which I may have to do later. I might not be able to actually do it from this screen. But yeah, if you want to, now that we have multiple sequences, we can go ahead and start dropping sequences into one. And I'm going to go ahead and call this green door. And let's put this inside the door sequences. Okay, so we should be familiar from the last tutorial of what we need to do here. So I need to go ahead and select the door because that's the thing that I want to animate. I am going to right click, say Actor 2 Sequence, add Mesh Door. Okay, so now that the door is there, and let's undo that. I hit the button on accident on my screen. All right. Now we don't really need a very long animation, and again I'm going to be very brief here because there's a whole video tutorial, about 30 minutes of it, that explains animations and how to make them with the platform that we did earlier. So we're just going to be skimming through this. The deal is we don't need a 5-second animation. Nobody opens the door in 5 seconds. Door openings are usually less than a second in length, so you can actually control the length of how much time you need for this. We can also reduce this so we can see more of our timeline. So we're zooming in a bit, and that's pretty good right there. So I have 0 seconds starting right there with 1 second ending the animation. Now, what I want to do is I want to record where the door is right now, but I don't want to do it on that very first green line. And the reason why is because the animation is going to be happening so fast, and with the flip-flop that we're going to be adding in later, we want to make sure that these buttons actually get triggered, that they don't come in, you know, if they're on the green line, sometimes I've seen it to where it may or may not catch it because it might there might be a delay or something like that, which means that it misses it. But if it's at least not on the green line, if you're like on the next little line, and you can see I'm not very far into time, I'm like 0.03 something. So this is where I want to do the transform. So if you haven't added the transform, go ahead and add track. Once I'm sorry, not add track. We want to go here, go to transform and click the transform button, and then that will add transform here. If you open up transform, remember this is location, rotation, and scale. And if I'm on the larger main heading and I hit the plus button, it's going to go ahead and mark where the location, the rotation, and the scale was for the door. Okay, now on the back side, we're going to want to do the same thing. We're not going to be immediately on the red. We're going to want to be just a little bit inside the red. And here what we want to do is go ahead and open the door to the extent that we're going to open the door to. So if you only want to open it this much, that's where you need to record the door opening to. If I want to have it record even further, or if I want it open up, let's say all the way like this far, then that's where I need to leave the door. Once I've got the door at where I feel is its finished opening state, I'm going to go ahead and again hit the plus button under over the transform, so it's doing it for all. And now we will see that we have a door that opens and closes. Okay, so for us, that's going to be it. We're not going to, oh, and I want to double check and make sure that my time was indeed in seconds. Okay, so if this is the first time that you've done it, I just saw the FPS right there. That means frames per second. If this is in frames per second, what you will need to do is select or click here, go to show time as, and then click on seconds. It should by default be in frames, but we want it to be in actual seconds. Okay, with the animation completed, now what we can do is go ahead and write the code that we need for the trigger box. So what we'll need to do is again select the trigger box for the door so that it is selected, and we're going to come up here to blueprints. Inside blueprints, we're going to open up the level blueprint, so we're opening up the blueprint for the level itself, and we're going to go ahead and deselect those. Now, with the trigger box selected, we are actually going to need two things. We are going to need to add two events. The first event is going to be a collision begin overlap, and you'll see that it gives us the name of the door and the fact that this is the trigger box for it, which is really nice. So it's a good idea to go ahead and name that because you may have multiple doors. Then add event to trigger box. We're going to add again another collision, and this time it's going to be the end overlap. Okay, so when we are in the overlap area, the key will work. When we are not in the overlap area or not inside the trigger box, the key will not work. From there, the next thing that we're going to need to do is grab the cinematic. We actually need to right click, and we don't need the box selected at this point, but it's there anyways. We can go ahead and type in event interact. Okay, remember this is the one that we created by going into the settings. So now we have when the person or when the character or when the player, I'm sorry, is going to press the E key, what happens, right? Because we've assigned the E key to that. All right, so from here what we're able to do now is right click and type in gate, and the gate is what's going to control the door. So we have an enter, open, close, and toggle. And on the outside we have, or the going out execute, we have an exit, like what it's going to affect. So from here we're going to hit E for the entry. So this is going to start the process. The overlap is only going to happen when the trigger box is being touched, and it will turn itself off or not become available when the trigger box is not there. From here, we now need what's called a flip-flop. Okay, and the flip-flop is actually exactly what it sounds. It's got two outputs, and depending on the condition, it's going to do one or it's going to do the other. So it's going to do one or it's going to do the other. And that flip-flop is going to happen from the interact key. So as we hit E the first time, it's going to open the door, and if we hit E again, it's going to close the door, because that's the animation that we're going to tell it to do. So now that we have both of those there, the next thing we need to do is grab the cinematic itself. So when you created the cinematic, it should have created a little icon, and the icon, if we don't see it because we don't know where the game left it, let's look over here, and we are looking for that level sequence. So there's the level sequence, and it left it down there for some reason. Okay, so let's bring that icon a little bit closer so we can see it. Okay, so I like to leave the icon close by, so then that way if I need to get to it, it's not sitting somewhere halfway around the world in the game. It's sitting somewhere close by to where it's needed or where it's actually being utilized. Most of the time I like to stick it either right next to the door or right above it. So now if I need it, I can find it. It's right there. Okay, so with the cinematic selected, right, so with the level sequence actor selected, we're going to go back to the blueprint. So we're going to go back to blueprint, level blueprint. Okay, we're going to right click in this space, and we're going to say create a reference to platform. Now we're going to need two, because one's going to be for the opening and the other one's going to be for the closing. So I'm going to hit Control C, Control V. That's going to give me a second pair. And now what I need to do is create a box that is called play and play reverse. So I'm going to click off and I'm going to type in play. And what we are looking for is this. So there is a option that is called play reverse sequencer, and since sequence is what we have, that's what a cinematic is, it's going to play this one in reverse. Now what it's done is created a little box which helps with the translation, so then that way it knows which cinematic to talk to, and we basically need to do the same thing, but we need to have a play now. So we're going to click here, we're going to type in play, and we are looking for play sequencer. And I'm just going to make that look a little prettier. Okay, so once those are ready, what we do is we attach one to the first one and the second one to play. And actually, we should probably reverse those. Let's put these guys down here, these guys up there. And let me redo these. So it's going to play the opening of the door first, and then it's going to close it. Okay. With that done, we should now have everything that we need to get the character to be able to open the door. The player pushes the E key, first time it opens it, second time it closes it. It only will allow the E key to work when it's in the vicinity of the begin overlap of that. Let's go ahead and hit compile and save. And now let's see if we can get through our door. So let's push play. Okay, so I'm going to stand back here and I'm going to try to hit the E key, and notice that the door is not opening. I'm going to get close to the E key, or close to the door, and the E key is not opening the door. And let's figure out why. Okay, well, after much looking around, I think I figured out what it was. I have this set to the platform. It's not going to work if it's on the platform. It needs to be the one for the door. So let's go ahead and delete those. And this is just paying attention 101. You just have to make sure. So I went looking for a level sequence actor and neglected to look at the name of it. And I do have another one which is right there called the green door. That's what we want. So with that one selected, I'm going to go, I'm going to go back to my level sequence, or I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to my level blueprint. And here I'm going to right click and create a reference of now the door called the green door. Okay, and we'll do Control C, Control V, and let's add that here. Now we're going to go ahead and hit compile and save, and we should have better luck this time. So let's push play. I'm going to walk up to the door. I'm going to hit the E key. Oh, okay. So what's happening here is that the door is indeed opening, but it is closing immediately, and that's because it's getting to the end of its when it gets to the end of its animation, it's looping back around and closing. So what we actually need to do is go to the animation itself, and in its details you'll see something that's called playback, and we don't want the autoplay to happen. We don't want this thing to happen on its own. We only want it to work when we're telling it to work. And then from there we have this little pesky button down here at the bottom that says pause at end. So when it gets to the end of its animation, it's going to stop. So let's go ahead and save. We can go and check our game, push play. We can walk in and hit E, and indeed the door does stay open. I can walk through the door, it stays open. If I hit the E key again, it then closes. I hit the E key again, it opens. And now we have a functioning open and closing door. Okay, yay. So that's the end of the tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.